All right, it is 6:30. So I would like to call this meeting to order and establish that we do have a quorum. Announce that this meeting of the Seguin Independent School District has been duly called and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Opens Meeting Act, Section 551.043 of the Texas Government Code. Mr. Guerra will be leading us in our pledges this evening.
Hang on.
Pledge allegiance. Okay.
Hang on just a second.
All right.
You ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee,
Texas,
one state under God,
God,
one and indivisible.
indivisible. Thank you, Mr. Guerra. We'll take a bit of time for a moment of silence. All right, thank you all. Second up our agenda is an audience with the board. At this time, we would have audience participation. We did not have anyone sign up this evening before the deadline, so we'll move straight on into the work at hand, which is a discussion of the 2021 budget, the development, and all of the challenges that we're facing.
Good evening, Board of Trustees. Tony, I just wanted to just share the purpose of today. We have a budget committee that's of 3 trustees that was scheduled to meet. However, I felt really strongly that everyone would need to be included in this conversation in light of recent events, especially as we start thinking about the possibility of experiencing a budget shortfall. Unfortunately, when states' economies are impacted, one of the first areas that they touch is education. And so we have been, over the last several weeks, really trying to put in place some proactive measures to help us ensure that we are impacted as minimally as possible after the 2021 legislative session. One of the examples was the board approval of the severance incentive, which is a measure to afford us the opportunity to begin to plan early when it comes to staffing, which is a significant percentage of our overall budget. It is certainly not a way to encourage experienced staff to go. It's geared towards those, and I want to state this again, who have been considering resigning or retiring from the district, and that's why we have established an early deadline so that we can, once we have vacancies arise, we can be creative with staffing. We've already started making some critical decisions in central administration that are painful to make, and we've reduced staffing already, and we're at a point where we've saved hundreds of thousands. So we realize that over the next year or two, it's going to hurt us, but we all have to remember that this is going to be temporary. If we can recall 2011, when school systems experienced budget cuts, it was temporary. Fortunately, Seguin ISD is in a really healthy financial position, but we are still making every effort to be prepared. And so today we wanted to make sure that all trustees are included in this conversation as we begin to plan the budget for next year. We will likely have to come together again in a couple of weeks, and Mr. Hilberg will share information that we will have available in the coming weeks. It's going to be important that we all that we keep the Board of Trustees informed as we progress through the budget planning process. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Tony Hilberg.
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. I apologize for stepping in there a little too quick. What I'll do here now is share my screen, and we'll go through what we know so far with respect to budget development for next year. So hopefully everyone is able to see the screen now. So obviously the first slide here is quite self-explanatory. We had our challenges to begin with, just dealing with HB3. And there was a lot of information that we were waiting for clarification on from TEA and other sources with respect to how we would remain in compliant and meet all of those criteria when it wasn't all laid out at the beginning of the school year. So we were operating in a year where we expected, as did every other district in the state, we expected that in the 2021 school year, we would have to make some adjustments to the budget in order to meet new compliance standards that we didn't have the clarification on in 1920. So we were already planning for a difficult budget season. In some respects, I suppose you could say that because of COVID-19, since that basically throws all of that out the window, or at least to some extent it does, it makes it a little easier in terms of how we're going to comply with HB3, because I think we've got all kinds of other issues that we have to address now. And those are what we'll be focusing on this evening. There are still HB3 issues that we will need to be cognizant of. And there will very likely be some things that TEA, our auditors, will say that we need to adjust in 2021. Whether that'll be a finding on the audit or not, time will tell. It's very difficult to say at this point in time. We most likely would be in a situation with respect to financial compliance, as most districts will be, where in a lot of cases what we're dealing with right now, we're going to fall under the umbrella of emergency operations. And so that alone, and we have board policy that supports that. So because of that, we're not likely to have findings, but we are likely to have comments, and even from TEA. So expect some extensive letters, probably along in December or January of next year, but we'll work through it. So let's go ahead and talk about who are we relying on. So again, just real briefly on HB3. Tonight, I'm not going to focus on HB3 so much and how it impacts our budget development for next year. I'm happy to answer any questions. I feel pretty good about our understanding of HB3, but COVID-19 is what's in front of us right now. And it's really what's impacting and affecting our ability to move forward in terms of the budget. So that's what I'm going to focus on tonight. But if you have questions that relate to COVID-19 or that relate to HB3 or anything else, please feel free to chime in anytime you like. But these are the resources I've listed here, and that's not an all-inclusive list by any stretch of the imagination. We're always a part of Region 20's Business Cooperative, and that's one of the main resources that I use, not only for my own training, but that of our department. And so Region 20 does a great job of funneling information to us and also converting difficult information into language that we can understand. So sometimes we need that added layer of expertise to help us process. And if you've ever read law or statutes, you realize you need an expert to help you. You can read the words, but to process what they really mean and how you apply that. So it's a cooperative where other CFOs and business managers work together in the entire region. And so we always are a part of that. There's also now a Region 20 COVID-19 support cooperative, which we are just now getting started. There's not been a whole lot of upstart on that just yet, but I do anticipate quite a bit coming forth in the coming weeks and certainly in the coming months. And so that's going to be most likely, and that covers more than just the business department. That covers all aspects of operations. And so the entire district is a part of that cooperative. Texas Association of School Business Officials, Texas Education Agency, Texas Association of School Boards, you're familiar with those. Of course, our legal firm as well as our audit firm have all been resources that we've reached out to up to this point in time and will continue to do so. So tonight, it was really tough to kind of figure out what are we going to talk about. But as I started to get into it, I realized there's plenty to talk about. There are a lot of questions, but there is a lot that we do know. We just don't know all the answers, but we do have some questions, things that we're really looking into, and even we're starting to get a lot of information. It's almost information overload now on how to proceed. All of the resources that I just showed you, every one of them is pushing out information now. So it's starting to become extremely difficult just to keep up with all of the information. So even since I developed these slides, there's been new information that's come to light, even as recently as today, quite a bit. So we'll talk about our revenue estimates for next year. That's fundamental for budget development. You need to know how much money you've got to work with. And we'll do a question and answer on that, as well as looking at the expense budget development. Where are we? What are our concerns? And what do we know and what do we not know at this point? So our revenue estimates, the challenges that we're facing right now. Well, one of the things that's actually not a challenge is what will the M&O tax rate be? Maybe not so much what will the final tax rate be. What I've listed here, HB3, the MCR stands for maximum compressed rate for the M&O side. That maximum compressed rate is already published by TEA. It's statewide, but it could be something, and it's unique. It is a little bit unique to Seguin ISD because we have the benefit of additional pennies in this rate that we might otherwise not have. You'll notice that it's 0.9764. That's just the M&O side. It doesn't include the INS side. As it stands right now, the INS side is 38.5 cents, and we'll get into that in a few moments. But for the M&O side, we know that the maximum rate we will publish next year is this rate here. It is possible that it could be something less than that, and that has to do with some things that TEA has to run, some calculations determined by, interestingly enough, the growth of property values. As you know, there's a limitation on property value growth, 2.5%. And so there's some calculations TEA has, well, that the state has to do, the comptroller has to do, and then we'll know what our final rate is. So what we will do is when we go to, and we have done this in the past as well, when we go in June and we adopt our budget, you do have the opportunity in some cases to adopt your budget and your tax rate, but because of some unique things with respect to Seguin ISD, we really can't do that. For one, we have to adopt our budget on June 30th, but we don't have enough information to definitively say and publish what our tax rate will be. But as long as we publish a tax rate that is ultimately, when we do adopt, not more than what we published in the public meeting to discuss the tax rate and the budget in late June, as long as we don't actually try to adopt a budget, a a tax rate that's higher than that, we do not have to have an additional public meeting. So you can take care of that public meeting all at once, and that's what we've done in the past. So HB3 made it pretty easy with regard to that. So, and that's kind of what I'm talking about here, is that the M&O tax rate is really not the concern. What we don't know is what our rate of tax collections will be. And that is huge, because you can do whatever you want in terms of tax rates, and property values can be whatever they're going to be. But at the end of the day, you only have the dollars that you can collect as a school district. And as you all are very well aware, there's been a lot of discussion of that, because the appraisal districts around the state, they take their snapshot for property values at the beginning of January. Well, in January, we didn't have the issues that we have now. And so likely all of you have received your appraisal notices for your home values, and many people and many businesses are trying to contest those now. So I don't know what to put down as our tax collection rate based on the property values. In the past, historically, us and every other district really, we're at about 97, 98%. So one of the things that I've talked to Dr. Gutierrez and the leadership team about is possibly using a 75% collection rate for next year based on the property values that we currently have. Now, there may be some clarification. I'll try not to overstep if someone has a question. That doesn't have to be done right now. That decision does not have to be made right now. We have some time. And hopefully as things open up in Texas and we get a clearer picture as time goes by, as we get closer to the end of May, beginning of June, perhaps 75% will sound unreasonably low, and we'll have a better idea even of what other districts are thinking too. But that's kind of where we stand right now. The issue though is that with HB3, it doesn't matter how much money the district collects out of taxes, because it's supposed to be offset to get to a target revenue by state revenue. And we talked about this a while back when we had the board meeting to discuss, in one part of it, we were discussing the financial impact if the property values went down as a result of the drainage of the lakes in our local areas. And you'll recall I explained how dollar for dollar, virtually, all of our lost tax revenue as a district would be compensated by the state. And that's all an aspect of HB3. The problem now is, and that's another thing that's been in the news a lot, is that really sustainable with statewide property value loss, which would have never been anticipated when the legislative session was in place. So those are challenges that the state's going to have to figure out, and they haven't told us what they're planning to do. So we have to proceed as it stands right now, that we're going to continue to operate under current funding law. So let me back up. I just want to clarify that there are 3 budgets that we're needing to look at, that you as a board are tasked with adopting and that we really focus on. And here I'm referencing M&O. You should know that represents the general operating fund. This next slide here is INS. That's referencing your debt service fund. And so we've got some unknowns with respect to INS, and that's again the tax collection rate. But we have an issue with INS that we did not have with M&O. But with M&O, as I just explained, those dollars that you lose in tax revenue are offset by state revenue. And we're hopeful that that'll be the case in 2021. But that is not the case on the INS side. Whatever you collect in taxes is what you've got to pay your debt service with. So what will be the impact on that fund? We have about maybe I could say about $600,000 of excess funds in that fund, 600,000. And that's probably being generous, but it's somewhere between 400 and 600,000. But we have an $11 million obligation, and actually it's a little bit higher than that next year, more like 12 million. So it's nowhere near enough fund balance to cover if we have severe deficiencies in property tax collections, and we don't have state funding to offset it. But again, if Seguin ISD falls into that scenario, Seguin ISD will be in company with every single school district in the state. We won't be alone in this challenge, but it's a big challenge. And I don't have the answer to it right now because the state hasn't been forthcoming with answers, how they're going to handle it if it should come to that. We also have to consider the fact that we have unsold bonds of $30 million, which under previous scenarios, projecting 0% growth, which would be wonderful if we just stayed flat and had 0% growth and didn't have property value loss. But we were estimating that we would be able to generate that $30 million with an additional 2.5 cents on the INS side. I can't guarantee that being the case anymore, obviously. I think that's in jeopardy. The good news is that I do not feel like right now we've only spent about 7 million of the initial bond sale, 34 million. And we may be in a situation where we might need to slow some things down that haven't started yet. I'm not saying that that's the case, and I have not discussed that with Dr. Gutierrez. I'm shooting a little bit from the hip. It's a little preliminary to say that, but there's options there is what I'm trying to point out. You've got some options that would allow you to still generate that, potentially still generate that 30 million. Dr. Gutierrez just mentioned that this is temporary. Things like this are completely unexpected. And, we've got to get through a period of time right now before things get back to normal. How much of that period of time is, it's anybody's guess. But if we're able to buy some time on that additional 30 million, then that might be something that we would want to look into. But again, we've got some time before we have to make that decision. As it stands right now, we weren't planning to issue those bonds until the possibly January of 2021. We could wait that long, possibly even later. So it just depends on how far we go with the things that are already underway. This is the child nutrition, what we do not know. And as you know, there's been a lot going on with child nutrition. They have been serving meals to the public, and that's a wonderful thing. The problem is they haven't been serving near the number of meals that they normally serve. So Texas Department of Agriculture reimburses or funds the Child Nutrition Fund based on the number of meals that they serve. And they employ a number of people, and they need to maintain a certain level of meal distribution in order to generate the federal revenue to pay their people and to buy the equipment. Of course, we can put that on hold, but we can't put paying the people on hold. And so those costs continue to add up. Another problem is when we're looking forward to next year is what do we anticipate post-COVID-19 enrollment to be? I know you've thought about that, but when it comes to the Child Nutrition Fund, how the enrollment goes is going to determine the maximum of available meals that we can serve. And that's going to directly impact the revenue that the Child Nutrition Fund can generate. As it stands right now, we have reason to believe that FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, CARES is COVID or coronavirus aid, relief, and Emergency Services Act or Emergency Securities Act, as well as other funding sources. we don't know everything we would like to know in terms of what will be allowable claims. And we'll talk about some costs that we've already incurred as associated with COVID-19. But even if we do determine that, we still don't know what the funding time frame will be. So it could take a while before we get the dollars, even if we were able to claim them. So let's talk about the current year just for a moment. General operating fund. Our operations are within budget. We actually have processes in place, internal controls in place that really don't allow us to go over budget in a given line item without coming up with a solution ahead of time. So we really aren't in a situation where we're potentially going to go over budget in the general operating fund in the current year, even in light of the circumstances. But I will say that fund balance could be impacted because of the shortfall in the child nutrition fund. And so you see the notation there to what extent that could occur. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. Let's talk about the INS fund for the current year. Again, operations are within budget. INS is pretty easy. Debt service is pretty easy to determine what you need because you know exactly what your debt service payments will be. You know what in your own lives, you know what your mortgage payment is. If for the next year, if you needed to calculate what that's going to be, it wouldn't be too hard to do. And the same is true with our debt service fund. We know exactly what our debt service payments will be for the year. So it's and for the 1920 year, we've paid all of our debt service payments. It's done, and we've virtually collected all the taxes for this year. So we don't have any issues with INS. Child nutrition. So just a little update. About 100,000 meals have been served to the community since the closure started in March 16th. And they're picking up more and more every day as we go. Sorry, did someone have a question? Year-to-date meals served, though, are down from the prior year. We're not down a whole lot as it stands right now, and the reason it's not is because I can't really calculate where we ended April until we finish April and run our financials. So I really only have 2 weeks worth of deficiency to look at. That deficiency meaning closed operations in the month of March. You know, we were already closed for spring break, and then we had those 2 weeks of closure after the 16th. So that's really all I have to go on definitively right now. But we've done some estimates based on some things, but we'll have a lot more information when we have a full month of closure for the month of April. So again, in the child nutrition fund, the operations have been affected by the school closure, and the most significant costs are going to actually be incurred in April and May. And the reason for that is because we're only going to have federal claims that are for what we're serving to the community. We're not serving any students. Well, we're not serving them in the capacity that we used to. We're serving them, but certainly in no respect are we serving them to the extent that we once did. Just in to give you an example, and again, this is skewed because we had the closure as a result of spring break. But when I compare March meal services this year to March meal services last year, and keep in mind that as we've been trending month to month all year long, we're actually showing gains up until March. In other words, we served more meals in February this year than we served in February of last year. And
Tony.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this by any chance going to affect also our summer meal program?
In terms of?
Being able to, yeah, can we still carry that on this summer?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, no, the program itself is not in jeopardy. In fact, that one's a little more sustainable than what we're dealing with right now, because this is, and if Jacob were here, he could give you a little bit more. We're actually running under a modified operations approach. We're kind of pigtailing off, and there's some details in that are beyond my expertise. It's just really detailed, but you're able to benefit from that summer feeding program right now, and Jacob is already doing that right now. It's not sufficient to do what we need it to do, but it's better than what we would be. It's in terms of the reimbursements and the types of things that we can serve is what it gets down to. But that program is not in jeopardy as I understand it at the moment. Now, you got to realize that things can change and they're outside of our control. But as it stands right now, that's not in jeopardy. So April and May. So what I was talking about is trending for the whole year so far. Each month, we were competitive or even beating the number of meals served in that same month in the prior year. So in March, we would have liked to seen the trend stay the same, right? When I compare March this year to last year, we were down about 100,000 meals. That's a lot of meals. So, and that's just with 2 weeks of closure. So how far will we be down in April and May? It'll be significant. And that's why, the numbers are pretty rough right now because I don't have that full month of April. Once we get that full month of April to look at, we'll have a better idea of what we anticipate our shortfall to be by the end of the year. Now, again, the good news is the hopeful news, and I want to share the hopeful news wherever I can here. These are tough times. There's not a lot of hopeful news, but we can't just panic. There is a good possibility, a real possibility that FEMA, TDA, or other funding sources will assist. Every district in the state right now that I've heard of is serving the community. It's something that everyone is doing. It's on their radar. How it'll look and how much will they fund it, I don't know. Will it be enough? I don't know. I think there's a good chance, probably better than some of the other areas where we're incurring some costs associated with COVID-19. I think this is one of our best chances of getting some recovery. And that's good news, because if we can get close to that 1.5 million, we'll be in good shape. Keep in mind also that there is some fund balance available in the fund itself to cover some of that, but it's not enough to cover it all. So hopefully between the fund balance that's in child nutrition and what we might get from FEMA or TDA as a result of the shortfalls, we'll at least be able to break even. That's my hope. If not, then the general operating fund balance is going to have to cover the difference. So you might be curious, what added costs will Seguin ISD incur due to COVID-19? And that's an excellent question. It's very difficult to answer because you've almost got to be, you really have to be creative in thinking, well, where are the costs coming from? You don't really foresee them, you just see them when they come. Give you a good example. I had no idea that technology was going to need to be buying hotspots early on for students who don't have the ability to connect in and learn, virtually. It seems perfectly logical now that would be something that they would need to do, but at the time it wasn't foreseen. Fortunately, that wasn't an overly large cost. Most of our costs are associated with the hazard duty pay. So right now, what we do know is what we've actually spent. So for those 2 weeks in March, we've already incurred those costs. And not all of the costs for hazard duty pay are associated with the Child Nutrition Fund. This slide you're looking at right now, these are the costs of hazard duty pay to the general operating fund only. And that's just for the time in March. Now, I will say with that, there was a change that took place as of April 1st in terms of how hazard duty pay will be rolled out. And so those 2 weeks in March, anyone and everyone who was coming in was getting hazard duty pay. Well, I shouldn't say anyone and everyone, but anyone that is a paraprofessional or not, and really it's not paraprofessional, but non-exempt employees. Non-exempt employees were getting hazard duty pay just if they were coming in for any reason. As of April 1st, that changed so that the only ones receiving hazard duty pay are the ones that are in the line of a hazardous situation where they're dealing with the public. We have ones coming in, but they're able to be isolated in a clean environment, and there's no one else around them, so, or very few, or they're able to maintain distances and safety. So the approach that districts are taking, and they are varied to some extent, but most districts are with the understanding that while physical campuses are closed, that is true, Seguin ISD and other districts around the state are not in an actual closure because learning is taking place, instruction is taking place. And so it's remote learning. It's different than it used to be, but we are not in a forced closure where the facility itself cannot be accessed and should not be accessed. This is a situation that we're in now. So there are those that will continue to be dealing directly with the public, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. General operating fund projected cost for hazard duty pay, if it is continued through June 30th, and this is going to have to do mostly with your custodial and transportation staff. You've got transportation employees who are assisting your child nutrition in serving meals. And we are also continuing the hazard duty pay for your custodial staff because they're the ones that are coming through on the campuses and disinfecting and touching all the surfaces and making sure that they're clean for everyone else. So we're viewing them as the ones that are actually in the hazard zone, and we want to give them the hazard duty pay for that. So if we continue that through June 30th, we will have an additional $160,000 cost in the general operating fund to pay them that. We also can anticipate that there'll be additional costs associated with distance learning. I mentioned the hot spots. There may be others. I'm not in a position to really say what they are right now, because like I said, you kind of got to think outside the box. It's not something we've done a lot of, distance learning. So I don't know what additional cost, and depending on how this soft opening occurs and where things go from here on out, that's subject to change. So, but we're just keeping in mind that we will have some costs. And again, it is possible that FEMA, the CARES Act, or other funding sources will assist. Another bit of good news is we don't anticipate any added costs for the current year in the INS Debt Service Fund. As I mentioned, the operations are virtually shut down now. Revenues collected, it's done. So COVID-19 has not affected it for the 1920 school year, but as we mentioned earlier, it likely will for 2021. Child nutrition actual costs since the closure, again, primarily related to hazard duty pay. The $35,000 you see there is just basically for those 2 weeks in March. And so if we extend that out through June, we expect an additional $220,000 for hazard duty pay. Now keep in mind, this is pay above and beyond their base. They're still getting their base pay. This is the additional cost associated just with COVID-19. So the financial impact on the child nutrition fund is not just this $220,000. They're not generating enough revenue to pay the base pay to all their employees. So just want to make sure that we're clear on that. You're not just looking at $255,000 worth of costs. you're short on revenue on the child nutrition fund to cover the cost of basic operations that you can't get out of at this point in time. But again, and I feel strongly on this one, that FEMA, TDA, or other funding sources will come in to assist us. So let's look forward now to what we're trying to do, which is develop a budget for next year. And we do have, some things that we're doing right now. We mentioned all the resources, and there's a lot of information forthcoming at this point. It's really, the floodgates are opening, and it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of webinars. It's a lot of Zooms. It's just constant. But it's starting to sink in, and we're starting to compute. I'm not doing this by myself. I've got a team. There's really about 4 of us in our department: Sally Eckert, Roxanne Molina, and myself, as well as Christina Garcia. And the others are involved too, but we're the ones that are really focused in on what does FEMA need, what do they want, what will they allow, learning everything we can about FEMA. CARES Act is one that's just now starting up. We don't have a lot on that yet, but the 4 of us will, so that way we can split up, we can be a knowledge base together. And, we've got others in the leadership team that are also doing the same. But with respect to business operations, the 4 of us are really trying to take on the new information. And then in our purchasing and payroll department, of course, they're focused on areas that are specifically applicable to them. But one of the things that I really learned today in a webinar that was regarding FEMA is that a lot of the things that they're going to require for filing a claim, it's stuff we already do. I mean, it's just not anything that I'm worried about in terms of, can we give them the documentation? I'm not worried about that at all. Our accounting processes are subject to federal guidelines all the time. This is nothing new. And we're doing every single thing without exception that I heard them talk about today. So we do have to make some hard decisions right now, and Dr. Gutierrez and the board, one of the ones that recently came to light was the resolution for the incentive, the severance incentive. That's a tough decision because Dr. Gutierrez, I see you're unmuted.
Yes, I was going to chime in. Go ahead. I was just going to share that, just want to go back and remind folks who are tuning in or who will, is that, we can go through and nitpick through department budgets, but that's really not going to add up to a significant amount of dollars to do much. Although we are doing that because every dollar is valuable. We are doing that, but it goes back to staffing a little more tightly and strategically, and really making every effort to avoid hitting the classrooms, but at the same time just being in a better position for a year. So the majority of those reductions are happening on the central admin side, and with early resignations that come in, it'll allow us to really reevaluate every single role and combine some roles, or do some creative scheduling at the campus level to save additional dollars. And we'll begin to keep you updated in next week on what that is looking like as far as cost with staffing changes.
Incidentally, I think it was just the other day, Ms. Moreno, you had asked me how many employees qualified for under that 10-year criteria, and you're looking at about 375 to 400 employees that qualify, that meet that 10-year criteria. So there are more unanswered questions, things that we don't know. But there are certain things that and Dr. Gutierrez just spoke to this, that we're really leaving off the table right now. We're not doing any major reductions in campus operational budgets. There have been some things that perhaps were already on the radar prior to COVID-19, and so those would continue on. But to make large cuts here on the operational budgets at the campus level, there are actually compliance reasons why we would have issues if we tried to do that. So we get a lot of federal funding, and one of the things that the Fed wants is to make sure that local dollars are being pushed out to the campuses, not only equitably, but also maintaining a certain level of expense. And if those levels aren't maintained, then federal funding can be jeopardized. So we've got some obligations in addition to just our own philosophical constraints that are preventing us from making huge adjustments to campus operational budgets.
Linda Duncan here. I wanted to thank you, Dr. Gutierrez, for your video today. I had some folks reach out to me and asking these questions about would there be cuts as far as classroom teachers. So thank you for doing that video today and trying to calm those concerns as well, because that's not what we're talking about right now. So
no, and that's exactly what we are wanting to avoid, is getting to that point. And that's really the purpose of being here together today to talk through the actions we're taking. And although there's still so much uncertainty, it's just important that we keep everyone informed throughout this process. And yes, there's possibilities to be reimbursed for the additional costs that come in, but we've also got to be prepared for the possibility that we're not reimbursed. We've got to be prepared for the possibility that our budgets are reduced in 2021. And it's an effort to keep the board informed throughout this process, but to also keep the community informed in the most transparent manner possible.
So it's really a matter right now of taking a little bit of a breath and allowing some things to transpire. And so we don't want to make knee-jerk reactions. We don't want to overreact. We don't want to act rashly. Our backs are not against the wall as we speak. And so it's time to let the authorities give us the clarification and the guidance that they can, so that we can make good decisions moving forward. And we do have some time. We do have some time. So at this point in time, we actually, before spring break, or it's to some extent shortly thereafter, but we do have all of the budgets from the departments and campuses pulled together. And we even have their special requests for the things that they were hoping for next year. And obviously, you think about the timing of that, they pulled all that together and sent it into the business department right there at spring break. And that's typical. It's every year we do it that way. So COVID-19 hit after all of those things were submitted. And obviously we've got to take some time before we go through those individual line items and say yes or no. We've got them documented, and we will be looking through them here shortly in the next week or two. But as it stands right now, no final decisions have been made on those. Now, campuses, just by way of the development, campuses receive an allotment every year. And, I will say that one given campus standing alone may feel like they're not getting the same allotment that another campus is getting. And that's understandable why they might feel that way. But the fact is, the allotment to the campus, the student allotment that the district pushes out is based on the enrollment numbers as we know them when we're developing the budget. So you know at Weinert how many kids you have this year in first grade. So you can anticipate how many kids they will have in second grade next year. And you can do that with every campus and every grade, with the exception of a few. And those are the challenges. And those are the ones that we have to look to trends and estimates and do our best. And then if necessary, we make adjustments during the year when we know more. So that's not uncommon, but those allotments are pretty locked in. They stay the same and will continue to do so for next year. So that's basically what I was just telling you, is we're looking at those line item budgets really starting in the next, I'm hopeful that we really start digging into it next week, but as we get more clarification and information from TEA and others, it may require us to take a little bit more time. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and this is not, we're at a point where we have a strategic plan and we're going into the third year. We're not looking at the need to invest in additional programs and initiatives. So those requests are minimal. What is, I think one of the things that this pandemic has brought to light is the disparities that exist within our society, and here in our own community, specifically when it comes to educating students and the lack of access to internet and technology devices, and that real possibility that we could experience this closure again should there be a resurgence. And so one of the things that I want to make sure that I give the board a heads up on is that we are, the administrative team, are having conversations about a way to phase in one-to-one technology. I think we've come to the realization that that is very important. In addition to the one-to-one technology, increasing the number of hotspots for students. And even if we were not to experience another school closure, the way we're educating students it's changed overnight, and it's not going to stop. Teachers are going to go back to their classrooms with more tools and utilizing technology in a bigger way. And what we can't do is deny students the opportunity to learn. And I just want y'all to know that that's something that we're going to come back with as we think about next year and what our needs are. It's that there are huge disparities in our community, and students are struggling. And as we progress through this pandemic, access to internet is going to decrease as parents are unable to pay their cell phone bill or internet bill. Families are going to have to make difficult decisions. And I think that's starting to happen. I think the majority of our students have, about 85% of our students have access, and the majority of those will continue through May. But what's scary to think about is that number decreasing over the summer as families continue to struggle more. And so I feel it's very important to share that right now, as we begin to talk about how school is going to look next year, while we're also talking about the budget for next year.
So we're really not off track in terms of budget development timing. Where we are right now is okay. And if it was any given normal year and this is where we were, I'd be okay with that. I'd normally like to be looking at some of the line item special requests right now. That's what we would do in SLT, Superintendent's Leadership Team. We would be looking at those line item special requests right now. That's been a little bit on hold, but we can do that, pretty quickly. We've got some bigger questions right now that we need to get some answers to before we start looking at those special requests. But we will get to it, and we we'll stay on our time frame. So I do anticipate that we'll have our first draft by mid to late May. And when I say first draft, what I mean is we go through it, we go through it once, we go through it twice, and then we go through it a third time to really get it to where we think it needs to be. Because there's never enough money to pay for every initiative or every thing that the kids need and that the district needs. There's always got to be some rationale behind shorting something a little in order to push something else a little more. And there's that offset. And so those second and third drafts are where you really start to try to balance that out and give everything you can to everyone you can. But we'll still have our budget ready for adoption on June 30th. I have no doubt about that. It's just, that's the rule, and that's what we'll do.
Tony, I have a quick question. Do you think the state will allow the districts like maybe an extra 30 days to work on the budget? It's going to be, a lot of it is based on what the state and the federal government's going to do as far as assistance. Have you heard anything about that?
I haven't heard anything about that, but I'm not really worried if they do or don't. You know, the board can adopt a budget and then we can revise it if we need to. And that's not uncommon. In fact, most years we do that. We adopt originally a budget because of our timing. You'll remember we've got a tax issue, and any year we don't know what our tax rate will be. Of course, House Bill 3 leveled that out a little bit for us, so we were hoping to benefit from that. But nonetheless, in the past, what we've done, we've come to you with a budget that was balanced, but it did not include the salary increases for the year. Once we were able to adopt a budget and determine definitively what we anticipate collecting, because property values aren't even finalized until the late July. We've got to adopt a budget in June. So we've got a month before we even know what our final property values are. And prior to HB3, that was, you know, half your money right there. So you had to come in with a revision to the originally adopted budget. You just didn't have any choice. So again, to your question, Mr. Guerra, there is a possibility that the state would do that. I guess it's not outside the realm of possibility, but whether they do or whether they don't, for us locally here in Seguin ISD, I don't see that it makes a whole lot of difference. But if they do, you know, I'll definitely let you know. And if you guys decide as a board that you'd like to postpone that adoption for that, however additional amount of time they offer, we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And so there are some things that we want to look at as a final note. We are looking at some savings associated with staffing, and this is not because of this is not because of COVID-19. It's just a normal course of business. However, as you may know, the special ed department has a lot of need, and much of that need started before this year. And there was some real effort made during the course of setting up the budget for 1920 to try to give the special ed department some additional staffing that they were really deficient. But it really didn't all come to fruition, and the problem has just gotten compounded even more. So there really are some savings, but they're being offset at this point by the needs of special ed. But I think we can still, overcome that. We can do more than just balance it out. And I know Dr. Gutierrez.
Yeah, and what we've been playing catch up for the last several years in special education. I don't understand why that was an area that was touched before. And so I think it's important to know when we see that there are additional staff added, that is the reason why Although SPED has provided a dream wish list, I mean, it's impossible to do that. And I expect everyone to provide a wish list. But there are needs. You know, our enrollment has stayed flat. In fact, a little decrease this year, which was projected from the demographer. But our enrollment of special education continues to climb, whether it's students qualifying or move-ins. And that's a great problem to have. If families find our program attractive, that's wonderful. Send your kids to us. They will be loved and cared for and taught a good quality education. But those are additional challenges with those numbers increasing on top of the fact that we're trying to play catch up with staffing. And so there are things that we need to put in place over the next several years. We'll be phasing that in to better meet the needs of our special education students. So that will impact some of the savings that are significant that we've identified so far.
So, you know, Seguin ISD, as you're familiar, we always have a benchmark of what we'd like to do in terms of staff. And historically, that's been to try to get at least between 2 and 3%. Now, you know, and we received quite a bit of money as a result of the 86th legislative session. There was some good funding that came through, and that was wonderful. And along with that funding came the obligation for districts to spend a certain amount of that new revenue on increased wages for particular groups. And so we did that and went even beyond that. But if we were to go back, and that was not something we could continue to do every single year. And I think that we made that very clear. I remember being asked the question, is it sustainable? Well, sustainability is, when it comes to wages, sustainability is, can you continue to pay that same rate? Sustainability is not, if you got 7% last year, can you give 7% every year there on out? That's not sustainability. And that was never something that we professed would be able to do. We were able to do a large increase last year because of that new funding, but we knew that we would have to come back to the norm that has been the historical, and that's to try to get to 2% or 3%, and maybe in a great year more than that. But I just want to share with you that in order for the district to do that this year, a 2% salary increase across the board, assuming the current staffing structure, that's going to cost around $1.5 million, possibly even more than that. So it's going to, I'm not saying it's not doable. I'm not in a position to say that right now, but that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, and there's still so many unknowns, but I think it's important for our staff to know that's what we're aiming towards. Fortunately, we were able to give a very healthy salary increase last year, but there will be things to consider, and if we feel like as we get more information, we may say perhaps we should not have a recurring cost. We need to look at some type of retention stipend. But that is ultimately our goal, is to aim towards that 2% for our staff, whether it's a salary increase or some type of supplemental pay. We want to do something while we're in a position to do so.
So COVID-19, you know, it's created a lot of problems, but one of the things that we're, as a district, are benefiting from is the reduced fuel cost and reduced utilities. Now, it may be significant in terms of those particular line items, but in terms of the overall budget of Seguin ISD, fuel and utilities are a small fraction of what the costs are. Costs are associated, 83% of the budget is associated with wages and the things along with that, and that's for every district in the state. So you will see some savings as a result of reduced fuel and utilities, and I'll have some data on that I'll share with you. But I won't have that until we close the books for April, and really won't have it until we get the invoices from the city for the utilities, and so that'll be a little bit later on in May.
We're also not paying substitute teachers. We're not. We don't have teachers who are out, and so there's not a need to call in substitute teachers as well. That's another consideration as well. I mean, there are going to be campus items that are going to be a savings for a campus, whether it's a need for paper to make copies. There are a lot of things that are not happening right now that will provide a savings, but right now we don't really know until, as Mr. Hilberg stated, we have a full month to really look at what that could be for March, April, and May.
So as soon as we get that detail, we'll dig into it and try to make some, useful comments for you and share that information when we have a little bit more data on that full month. So with that, happy to address any questions that weren't addressed or clarification on things that were addressed.
I just want to say, Tony, you gave us a really great comprehensive overlook of all of the challenges, and I appreciate y'all putting the work into it. And I know y'all are working extremely hard. You're actually doing two things at once. You're trying to absorb all this information and at the same time trying to put together our budget for next year. So I wanted you to know we appreciate that. And thanks for keeping us in the loop. And I guess a couple of weeks we'll have more answers.
Yes, we'll be. I'll get with Tony and then get with Nancy to schedule another budget workshop. It's gonna be important that we come together as frequently as we can as we progress through this and learn more, because we're learning so much every day. As Tony stated earlier, there's information overload that's coming in all areas beyond budget. So we're learning every day.
All right. Do any of the other trustees have any questions or comments?
This is Carl.
Yes.
I'd like to say Tony and his staff appreciate all they're doing, especially being conservative and doing this ahead of time, and there's not going to be any problems arise from it, as far as surprises. If there are some surprises, hopefully they're good surprises, that we have good things that come out of this, and not too bad. At least I know him being the conservative person he really puts it down, to where we can, probably the worst case scenario on some of this today, but hopefully it'll be good when it comes through.
Anybody else? If not,
I'd just like to echo
thank you.
the same, as far as a good presentation, Tony, and thanks for putting everything together. And I like the plan that Dr. Gutierrez talked about, the plan they're working on for when school starts again in fall. We have to be prepared for different scenarios on how to handle that. So get some sleep, Tony.
And to those of you on the budget committee, now we know how you feel. It's a lot that goes into this. Well, if there are no other questions, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All right. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Denise. Motion from Mr. Amador, a second from Ms. Crittenden. All in favor, raise your right hand. And we will now adjourn this meeting. And we'll see everybody soon.